Well, hello there, and welcome back to the Terri Show. I'm so happy to see you. I want to start with a little scenario. So imagine this. You're going away for the weekend, or you're going out to dinner with friends. And as you're getting ready, your partner is getting quieter and quieter, less responsive to what you're saying. There's just a shift in the air. You can feel that something is going on with them. By the time you leave to go, get in a cab to go uptown, to go wherever you're going for dinner, they've called you twice. By the time you get to the dinner, you've got a bunch of text messages from them. And by the time you get home, there's literally just a fight waiting to happen. So if you've been on either side of this scenario, that like you're going out to do something with your friends and suddenly there is a major problem with it, then you know exactly what this episode is about. It's about emotional safety. So what is emotional safety? That's what we're going to talk about. And what are the things that really get in the way of us creating, right? We're talking through basically 5 signs of personal lack of emotional safety, right? We could call it emotional insecurity, but I feel like lack of safety is a more accurate way. What it can look like in a person, where it may come from, how you can spot it in others. And then in a part 2 of this, I'm going to give you 6 things not to do because they destroy emotional security in a relationship. So we can flip that to say, I'll give you 6 things that you can do to create more emotional safety in your relationship. So before we get into it, I just want to say thanks for being here. Make sure that you hit the subscribe button and hit that bell icon so that you get notified every time that I roll out something new, which I do twice a week. And I literally create it for you. So I wouldn't want you to miss a thing. Now would I? I would not. All right, let's move it on into today's content. So we're going to take it right from the top, which is, what is emotional safety? So this is basically a felt sense of safety, that we can be ourselves with someone without getting punished for it. So when it's there, a relationship has like flexibility. So it's like you feel like you can breathe in the relationship. You're not hypervigilant in that relationship. When it isn't there, there's this sense, because I've been in both relationships, there's this sense that you're always defending, or you're always monitoring the other person's mood, right? You're always performing. There's this sense of being like checking to make sure that everything's okay. Personal insecurity, this is different than relational emotional security, right? We're not talking about the same thing, which is why I didn't want to use the word insecurity, because I think it makes it confusing, right? Insecurity sounds like if I tell them how I feel, they'll leave, right? And that's about us, right? That's our own insecurities. But lack of emotional security in a relationship is more like, if I disagree with this person, this could fall apart. Right? It's not feeling like the relationship is solid. So that is a dynamic as opposed to a personal insecurity. So, as I was saying before, this is a 2-part series where today we're going to be talking about 5 signs of personal emotional lack of safety, what it looks like in a person, where it may come from, how to spot it in others and in ourselves. And then in the follow-up episode, I'm going to get to the 6 things we want to avoid because they destroy emotional security in a relationship. And I could flip that to say 6 things you can do to build emotional security in a relationship. You guys, I've been talking about this lately because I was doing an interview with this NFL guy who, his name is Cedric, and he's got a podcast. And I don't know, we just started talking about relationships, and he was so thoughtful and so insightful, and I just feel like he's doing such good work for men, right? Leading that you can have a high emotional IQ and still be a man, because he was like a big linebacker type of guy. Anyway, and we were talking about, he was like, what do you think is the most important thing in relationships? And I really was like, emotional safety. And that's what inspired me to want to do this series, because he was like, fascinating, tell me more. And we just really got into it, where I feel like emotional safety is the thing that we're all looking for. It's what we all wanted from our parents, whether we got it or not. And it's what in every relationship we are seeking to create emotional safety. And when we do create it, it is a solid foundation for us to build a life on, to build a relationship on. It's solid. Now, it doesn't mean relationships have to be perfect, but there are ways to identify this. I just feel like most people don't talk about it. So anyway, hence why I'm talking about it. So let's get into the 5 signs. So 1 is lack of trust. So this is one of the bigger signs, right? And this is easy to sort of identify in a relationship. Some of the other ones we're going to get into are more subtle. If there's lack of trust in a relationship, someone is accusing you of something, or you're doing that. There's the push-pull of it all. Checking phones and emails. Constantly verifying faithfulness, basically, is what that lack of trust is. You may have experienced this in a friendship. We've all seen it in movies and television shows. And maybe you've had this experience yourself. These types of trust issues, though, don't usually start with the current relationship, right? This stuff runs deep. A lot of times these get carried from earlier situations, right? This is more like your downloaded blueprint around trust. So if you grew up in a family system where there was infidelity, let's say, you may think all partners cheat, right? That may be your experience. And maybe your lived experience tells you that that's true, right? But this is where we have to decode repeating relationship realities. With lack of trust, if you grew up and promises were not kept to you, that the adults in your life didn't do what they said they were going to do, that you learned over time that the people who are supposed to be reliable aren't, right? And so those are the bigger behaviors. But the smaller behaviors are a little bit harder. They're more like micro behaviors, maybe we would call them. They're a little bit harder to notice. So reluctant to meet a partner's family because some part of us is already certain we won't be accepted. Coming across as controlling or overbearing when what we're actually trying to control is our own internal sense of not feeling safe. Right? We're trying to do something about the uncertainty that we feel inside, but we're projecting it outward. Reading someone's neutral behavior or their facial expression as threatening, right? Because the nervous system, if you grew up in that childhood that I described, learned a long time ago that neutral wasn't necessarily safe, right? Testing relationships, this lack of trust, especially if it's a childhood thing, it can just happen over and over again where you're endlessly testing the relationship to see if it'll hold because you fear it won't is the why. And of course from the outside it also can look like jealousy and possessiveness, but again, those are the big red flags, right? Underneath, it's often just a much younger part of us saying, is this person going to stay? Right? Because that's what the fear is. It's fear of abandonment, fear of rejection. I was in a relationship once. I really only had one relationship like this in my life with someone who was so convinced that I was going to leave them that for years I was like, why does he keep saying, this is just such an exhausting and boring conversation. I had no intention of leaving, but I have to say there's a part of me that knew eventually that I would, and I did. Because it's like that his lack of emotional safety within himself seeped into the relationship. And listen, I don't think it was, I ended up in the right marriage for 30 years. I have no regrets, but I can say that lack of safety that he had within himself seeped into the relationship and absolutely was part of the reason that I ended the relationship eventually. All right, so number 2, hiding your true feelings. So this, a lot of times we see this with people who have identify as having avoidant attachment issues. So it's the partner that puts on the happy face at all costs, right? From the outside, the relationship looks fun, looks great, high energy, everyone's having a good time. But when it's time to go deeper, the person may not have the capacity to do that. So with avoidantly attached people, it's fear, right? Vulnerability didn't go well for them in childhood, somewhere along the way. So the system learned that the safest move is to keep things light, right? We don't need anyone too much, and let's just keep everything light. So what does this actually look like in a relationship? The relationship a lot of times can run on intensity or excitement instead of intimacy. Hard conversations get deflected. They get joked about or they get avoided altogether, right? And how can you problem solve if you can't have real conversations? For someone with this type of attachment, vulnerability feels like a trap, right? Not necessarily like a bridge that connects you. It feels more like a trap, like something they're trying to avoid. Endings tend to be sudden and can look like abandonment because real intimacy was too hard for them to tolerate the way that it made them feel. So a lot of times they're just like, and I'm out. And that is the end of that. So from the outside, this type of relationship can really look great, right? You might have, gotten along very well, not a lot of big fights. You might have had a lot of fun. And then it ends without clear explanation, which can be really painful because that the avoidant partner just couldn't handle that next level of closeness that was required for the relationship. So I've seen this often in my therapy clients. And, part of me, instead of getting caught up on the why did the partner do what they did, therapeutically, I'm way more interested in why my client attracted that partner, right? Because that's material we can actually work with clinically, is their experience and the why of that, and what did this remind them of, and what are they repeating in this relationship. Okay, number 3, constant need for reassurance, right? This is another indication of having lack of emotional safety. So at the core of this, like, why do we need that? And when I was younger, I definitely needed this for sure. But there's a sense of inadequacy a lot of times. For me, in my early 20s, for sure, my mid 20s as well, probably, I didn't know myself well enough to be able to hold myself or my own self-esteem. I hadn't built any self-esteem. I hadn't done anything yet in the world. You know what I mean? So I felt inadequate, and I could get positive feedback. I was always in a relationship and then always breaking up a relationship, but I was like a serial dater type of person because at least someone mirroring back to me, whether it was just their desire for me, that was sort of enough, but it was definitely masking a sense of inadequacy. And, for a lot of people, they didn't get consistent love or attention in childhood, right? This can also create this lack of stable self-esteem because that's what forms it. And if you have a father wound like I do, right, part of that inadequacy, I felt lovable because I was securely attached to my mother, but I felt inadequate in some ways because I was insecurely attached to my father and never felt like I measured up, which really stoked my ambition, right? I was proving something all the time. So I feel like everyone has their own reasons for being the way that they are or needing constant reassurance. Needing, do I look okay? Are we okay? Right? All of that. So what else does it look like in a smaller way? Asking for approval in small ways, right? Constantly without even noticing it. Even in the way that you speak, even in the language that you use. Like, does that make sense? Or do you know what I mean? Or, like that, where you could be asking not just a romantic partner, but anybody for reassurance. You could also read silence as rejection, which is not accurate. I mean, that's not necessarily what it is. And when you feel this way, when you feel inadequate, a lot of times someone else's reassurance, it doesn't do what you want it to do because your inner critic is so loud that you still feel insecure. Even if you get reassurance, you could tell yourself a story like they're just being nice, and that's not necessarily true. And, a lot of times people who need a lot of reassurance often are put in the category of needy. And I feel like it's like unfair because that's not necessarily what it is, right? It's dealing with that inner critic and that inner voice telling them that they're not enough. And I dealt with this in my own life. And they're really trying to drown out that negative voice or that voice that says they're not enough with this other reassurance, with someone mirroring back to them their value, right? But we have to go to the original injury, which we'll talk more about how to do that in the second part of this 2-part series. All right, the 4th thing is walking on eggshells. So this is basically always on edge energy. When you feel insecure, when you feel a lack of emotional safety, hypervigilance is absolutely one of the things that you'll notice in your life because we're always checking, right? We're always checking to see, is everything okay? The nervous system that can never rest is someone who's walking on eggshells. And you probably learned early in life, right? We all go back to the scene of the crime. I hate to say it, but it's true. We're going back to childhood because this is where all this shit started. I mean, this is just what it is. Where this is also a way that you may have gotten your needs met. But being on high alert, if it's something that you identify with, it's exhausting. I mean, this also connects us to, if you read my HFC book, my High Functioning Codependency book called Too Much. This ties into anticipatory planning, right? It's more than just checking what's happening. We're now projecting into the future and trying to make sure that we rehearse the conversation so everything goes well, or that we figure out what they're going to say and then what we're going to say. We figure out how to soften the ask, right? By the time we even open our mouth to say anything, we've done all of this sort of unpaid labor of like getting the person in our good graces. And the person doesn't even know that we're doing all this. It's just so much work. What does it look like in your everyday life, though? This type of insecurity, always waiting for the other shoe to drop, right? Even in relationships that are actually good. My clients will be like, but I feel like something bad is going to happen, right? Being a workaholic, that was certainly my go-to move. Being a serial monogamous, as I said before, that I was a serial dater, right? Hoping that like a new environment is going to change what's happening. But as they say, wherever you go, there you are, right? And this is the same thing. It can look like super attunement to your partner's mood, right? Voice, body language, scanning for trouble, right? As the hypervigilance is there, but we're even more dialed in when it's a partner situation. All right, and listen, if this is you again, this is exhausting, right? And nothing's wrong with you, right? This was adaptive in childhood. It becomes maladaptive in adulthood. We'll talk more about how to not do it in the next episode of the Terri Cole Show. All right, and the last one I want to talk about quickly is self-sabotaging behavior. So this is painful, right? Because when you grew up in an environment, if you did, where thoughts and opinions and your feelings didn't get treated like they mattered, let's say, that message can impact us on such a deep, deep level of worthiness and how we feel about ourselves. And that message starts to drive our behavior. Right? So what does that look like for many of us in this lifetime? Sabotaging our own happiness because somewhere down deep, we don't feel like we deserve it. You might have lost touch with what you really want. You may not even know what you really want. But I really do think it's a deserving thing when we get into self-sabotaging behaviors. We are just not positive that those things are for us, those happy things in life. Those are for other people who are not like us, quote unquote. So what does it look like to be self-sabotaging in a relationship, picking fights when things are going well, leaving a relationship right before it gets real? Anyone ever just ghost? You're just like, I'm bowing out now. Choosing partners who confirm the old story that you're not enough. Achieving something and then sort of undoing it. Like we can't hold on to the achievement. Numbing out with what I refer to as shadow addictions. So these are socially acceptable ways to check out. Doom scroll, the nightly wine, the workaholism, over-exercising, whatever it is. But self-sabotage really starts with self-abandonment. So we want to be looking at that. The way we have ghosted ourselves long before we ghost other people. The promises we don't keep to ourselves, right? The needs that we've registered but then we don't do anything about. Like we just ignore them. A lot of high-functioning codependents and a lot of people who self-sabotage are always like kind of last on their own list. Now, it doesn't mean, these things can't be figure outable. As my friend Marie Forleo would say, everything is figure outable. So if this identified with you, don't worry, I'm going to give you this in the go to terricole.com/guide. I'm providing a guide to go along with this. So the 5 are lack of trust, hiding your true feelings, constant need for reassurance, walking on eggshells, and self-sabotage. And wherever you see yourself in this, if you do, this is not who you are. These are simply behaviors. So if having more emotional security and safety in your life is a priority for you, and I hope it is, I hope that this episode of the Terri Cole Show added value to your life. Please go download the guide so you can sort of dive a little bit deeper on this. And make sure to tune in to the next segment where I'm going to be giving you 6 things that you can do to basically build more emotional safety and security in your relationships, because you deserve to feel safe and secure all the time. So I hope this added value to your life. If it did, let me know on Instagram and all the places where you know I am. I hope you guys have the most amazing week. And as always, take care of you.